Michael closed the distance between them, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He demanded to know what could possibly be important enough to risk her freedom, her safety, and the precarious balance he was trying to maintain to keep his children. He watched her closely, searching her face for a sign of betrayal or blackmail, remembering how their story had started as a game of leverage and financial survival. But there was no malice in her expression, only a profound, terrifying raw vulnerability. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, Jacinda unbuttoned her trench coat and let it drape over her arms, resting a hand gently against her abdomen. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, the silence between them stretching so tight it felt as though the entire mansion had held its breath. She told him that the money he had given her had stayed in her bag untouched. She hadn't run because she was afraid of Willow or the law. She had tried to run because she was terrified of what she had discovered 2 days after crossing the state line. She looked directly into his eyes and revealed the truth that would blow the fragile peace of Port Charles to pieces: she was pregnant with his child. The words hung in the humid morning air, heavy and irreversible. Michael felt the room tilt beneath his feet, the reality of the revelation crashing into the delicate web of lies, legal battles, and emotional wounds he had been trying to navigate. Jacinda explained that she had visited a clinic far from Port Charles under a false name, desperate to confirm what her body was telling her, hoping beyond hope that it was a mistake brought on by the immense stress of her exile. But the doctors had confirmed it without a shadow of a doubt. She was carrying a Corinthos heir, a baby conceived during those quiet, desperate nights when they had sought comfort in each other's arms away from the prying eyes of the city. She admitted that her initial instinct had been to keep running, to raise the child in complete anonymity far away from the corruption, the mob ties, the corporate warfare, and the endless vicious cycles of the Quartermain and Corinthos families. She knew what society thought of her, a former escort, a woman hired to play a role, a pariah who had crossed the line by drugging Willow. She knew that if she returned, the town would paint her as an extortionist, a scheming opportunist trying to trap one of the wealthiest men in New York. But as she sat alone in a sterile motel room, looking at the sonogram printout, she realized she couldn't rob the child of its father, nor could she let Michael fight his battles alone while carrying his bloodline inside her. Michael stood frozen, his mind racing through the immediate, staggering implications of her return. The timing could not have been more disastrous or more profound. Willow was currently building a case to portray Michael as an unfit father surrounded by unstable, dangerous criminals. If Willow learned that Jacinda was back in town, living under Michael's protection and carrying his baby, the courtroom war would transform into an absolute bloodbath. The news would send shockwaves through Metro Court, shatter the already fragile standing of Quartermain corporate interests, and ignite a fresh war with Drew Kane, who still held a deep, burning grudge against Jacinda for her role in his public humiliation and poisoning. Yet, beneath the wave of panic and strategic calculation, a deep, primitive instinct stirred within Michael. He looked at Jacinda, noticing the slight tremor in her hands, the exhaustion shadowing her eyes, and the sheer courage it had taken for her to walk back into the lion's den knowing the hatred that awaited her. He set his coffee cup down on the table, the sharp click breaking the stillness of the room, and stepped toward her. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before resting softly over hers, right against her stomach. The warmth of her skin beneath the fabric brought an overwhelming sense of reality to the moment. Jacinda let out a shuddering breath, a single tear cutting through her makeup as she leaned slightly into his touch. She told him she didn't expect him to marry her, nor did she expect him to parade her in front of the town if it destroyed his chances with Wiley and Amelia. She made it clear that she hadn't come back to ruin his life or force his hand, but because this child belonged to both of them, and she refused to hide in the shadows like a dirty secret. She was prepared to face the consequences of her past actions, to face the police, and to stand up to Willow if it meant securing a future where her baby wasn't forced to live on the run. Michael looked at her, his expression hardening into a fierce resolve that mirrored his father's legendary determination. The retreat was over. The calculated retreat he had forced upon her to appease the town and placate Willow was no longer an option. He told her firmly that she was not going anywhere. She was staying in Port Charles, and she would be protected under the full umbrella of the Corinthos and Quartermain resources. He acknowledged that the road ahead would be a brutal, chaotic war, that Willow would use every weapon in her arsenal, and that the town's high society would sneer at her presence. But he swore to her that he would not abandon his child, nor would he allow her to face the storm alone. As the rain continued to beat against the heavy glass of the Quartermain estate, the two stood in the quiet parlor, bound together by an explosive secret that was bound to rock Port Charles to its core. The arrival of Jacinda Bracken was no longer just the return of a controversial former escort, it was the arrival of a pregnant mother bearing the ultimate plot twist in the city's ongoing drama, setting the stage for a dramatic showdown that would test loyalties, break alliances, and reshape the future of the Corinthos legacy forever. The news of Jacinda's pregnancy echoed through the spacious entryway of the Corinthos estate like a sudden clap of thunder, leaving an unsettling stillness in its wake. Michael stood motionless near the threshold, his knuckles white around his briefcase, his mind struggling to bridge the vast gap between the quiet, orderly life he had been attempting to reconstruct and the life-altering reality now standing before him. For weeks, he had convinced himself that closing the book on Jacinda was the ultimate act of responsibility, a sacrifice required to protect his children and restore calm to his fractured world. Yet, as he looked into her tired, earnest eyes, the reality of her revelation pierced through his carefully constructed emotional walls. Carly was the first to react, breaking the heavy silence with the fierce, protective instinct that defined her very essence. Stepping directly into Michael's line of sight, her tone turned razor-sharp as she challenged the premise of Jacinda's sudden comeback. She openly questioned the timing of the announcement, highlighting how convenient it seemed for Jacinda to surface only after running through the resources Michael had provided for her departure. Carly's suspicion was a well-honed survival mechanism, built over decades of navigating betrayal, schemes, and unexpected errors within the cutthroat social ecosystem of Port Charles. She made it abundantly clear that the Corinthos and Quartermain families would not simply take her word as truth, demanding verifiable proof before allowing this revelation to alter her son's life any further. Jacinda stood her ground under Carly's scorching glare, refusing to shrink back or engage in a shouting match. Her demeanor remained remarkably composed, though a flicker of hurt crossed her face at the insinuation that her motives were purely financial or manipulative. She looked past Carly, focusing her gaze entirely on Michael, acknowledging that she understood why skepticism was their default reaction. She explained that she had no desire to extort his family, nor was she seeking to force him into a relationship he didn't want. Jacinda revealed that she had visited a clinic in another state weeks ago, driven by a persistent feeling that something was wrong, only to be met with the unmistakable confirmation of her pregnancy. She admitted that her initial instinct had been to keep the truth hidden forever, to spare Michael the storm it would inevitably create, but as the reality set in, she knew she couldn't strip him of his right to be a father. Michael finally found his voice, stepping forward to gently intervene between his mother and Jacinda. His tone was subdued, heavy with a complex blend of shock, anxiety, and a deep-seated sense of duty. He thanked Carly for her instinct to shield him, but firmly insisted that this was a matter he needed to handle directly with Jacinda. Turning to Jacinda, Michael looked at her with a mix of warmth and profound uncertainty, asking her to come with him to a private space where they could speak without the pressure of an audience. Though Carly voiced her immediate objections, warning him not to let his compassionate nature cloud his judgment, Michael held firm, leading Jacinda out of the main house and toward the quiet sanctuary of the guest cottage on the edge of the property. Inside the quiet living room of the cottage, away from the watchful eyes of the main house, the atmosphere softened slightly. Michael offered Jacinda a seat and brought her a glass of water, watching her hands tremble slightly as she took it. In the privacy of the room, Jacinda allowed the fortress she had built around herself to crumble just enough to reveal her genuine vulnerability. She spoke openly about the overwhelming fear she had experienced over the past few weeks, navigating the early stages of pregnancy alone in a strange city, haunted by the memory of how her previous chapter in Port Charles had ended. She reiterated that she had not returned to make demands, but because she believed Michael was fundamentally a good man who deserved the truth, regardless of what he chose to do with it. Michael listened intently, sitting across from her with his elbows resting on his knees, his mind racing through the endless complications this news presented. He thought of his children, Wiley and Amelia, who were already recovering from the upheaval of his separation from Willow. He thought of the delicate custody arrangements, the fragile peace he had negotiated with Willow, and the sharp scrutiny his family faced from every media outlet in the state. Adding a third child into this delicate web, especially one conceived with a woman whose past in Port Charles was shrouded in controversy, would inevitably detonate a bomb in the middle of his family's lives. Yet, despite the chaos it promised, Michael felt a profound, instinctive pull toward the child Jacinda was carrying, an unyielding Quartermain sense of obligation paired with a genuine affection for Jacinda that he had never fully managed to extinguish. While Michael and Jacinda confronted the reality of their situation in the cottage, Carly was already taking action. Refusing to sit idly by while her son was potentially drawn into another complicated web, she picked up her phone and dialed the one person who understood the intricate legal and personal dynamics of Port Charles better than anyone, Alexis Davis. Carly detailed the shock appearance of Jacinda and the stunning claim she had made, urging Alexis to prepare for the inevitable fallout. Carly insisted that before any family discussions progressed, a discreet, ironclad paternity test would need to be arranged, standard procedure for any child born into the Corinthos or Quartermain bloodlines. Word of Jacinda's return began to spread through the quiet channels of the town like wildfire. At Metro Court, Willow Tate was catching up on paperwork over lunch when she noticed the hushed whispers among the staff and the uneasy looks directed her way. It wasn't long before Nina Reeves, whose radar for family drama was always finely tuned, approached her with a cautious, concerned expression. Nina gently broke the news that Jacinda had been spotted back in town, specifically near the Corinthos property. Willow felt a cold drop in her stomach as the information settled in. She had worked tirelessly to rebuild a sense of stability for her children, believing that the storm surrounding Michael's fleeting relationship with Jacinda had passed. The news of her return sparked an immediate wave of anxiety, threatening to unravel the fragile harmony they had worked so hard to establish. Back at the guest cottage, the conversation between Michael and Jacinda reached a critical juncture. Michael expressed his desire to handle everything with absolute transparency and care. He made it clear that while he needed time to digest the news and process the logistical realities, he would not abandon her or the child if the pregnancy was confirmed to be his. He proposed that they schedule an appointment with a trusted physician at General Hospital to verify the health of the baby and establish a clear timeline, assuring her that regardless of their personal relationship status, he would provide total financial, medical, and emotional support. Jacinda nodded slowly, relief washing over her face as she realized that Michael was not going to reject her outright or treat her as an adversary. She agreed to take whatever tests were necessary, expressing that her only wish was for the child to grow up with the love and security Michael provided to all his children. However, as they stepped out of the cottage back into the crisp afternoon air, they were greeted by the formidable presence of both Carly and Sonny Corinthos, who had arrived after receiving an urgent summons from Carly. The stage was now set for an intense family confrontation, as the patriarch and matriarch of the family stood side by side, ready to protect their son while facing a revelation that threatened to rewrite the future of their entire legacy. The standoff in front of the cottage dissolved into a tense, hushed negotiation as Sonny Corinthos joined Carly, Michael, and Jacinda. Sonny's dark eyes flicked over Jacinda, assessing her with the calculating stillness that had allowed him to control the Port Charles underworld for decades. He acknowledged that the situation was far bigger than a personal feud or a simple matter of hurt feelings. If Jacinda was indeed carrying a Corinthos heir, the child would instantly become part of a complex family narrative, subject to both immense privilege and constant danger. Sonny made it clear that while he shared Carly's caution, he would never turn his back on his own blood, insisting that the truth be established quickly and quietly away from public scrutiny. Later that afternoon, the group gathered in a private examination wing of General Hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic hum of diagnostic equipment provided a stark backdrop to the intense emotional weight filling the room. Dr. Portia Robinson conducted the initial consultation, maintaining a strictly professional boundary despite her own past ties to Jacinda's turbulent arrival in town. A comprehensive ultrasound was performed, and as the monitor flickered to life, the unmistakable sound of a steady, rapid heartbeat filled the small room. Michael stood near the head of the examination table, his gaze locked on the screen. The sight of the tiny form pulsing on the monitor grounded the situation in absolute reality, melting away the abstract legal worries and family opposition. Whatever anger or reservations he had held about Jacinda's past actions, the life growing within her was real, and his connection to it was instantaneous. Jacinda looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes, silently communicating the relief of having her truth validated. A rapid blood panel was processed under expedited lab protocols, confirming both the pregnancy and a gestational timeline that aligned precisely with their time together before her departure. When the medical team left the room to finalize the preliminary paperwork, the heavy silence returned. Carly, who had watched the ultrasound from the doorway with folded arms, stepped closer to the bed. The protective edge in her voice softened slightly, replaced by the grim pragmatism of a mother who recognized that the board had completely shifted. She acknowledged the reality of the pregnancy, but reminded both Michael and Jacinda that Willow would react with total hostility the moment she found out. A new child would destabilize the delicate custody arrangements currently keeping Wiley and Amelia safe, giving Willow and her legal team ammunition to claim that Michael's household was a chaotic, unpredictable environment. Across town, news of Jacinda's presence at General Hospital reached Willow through casual chatter among the hospital staff. Driven by deep suspicion, Willow marched toward the private wing, intending to confront Michael about bringing a woman who had previously targeted her back into their orbit. She rounded the corner just as Michael and Jacinda stepped out of the room, flanked by Carly and Sunny. The immediate, protective stance Michael took in front of Jacinda spoke volumes before a single word was uttered. Willow demanded an explanation, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and betrayal. She confronted Michael about jeopardizing their family's fragile peace, accusing him of harboring a woman who had proven to be a dangerous influence. Michael took a slow step forward, attempting to de-escalate the situation, but realized that hiding the truth would only make the eventual fallout far worse. With quiet firmness, Michael informed Willow that Jacinda had returned because she was pregnant with his child. The revelation struck Willow like a physical blow. The color drained from her face as she processed the reality that Michael's life was moving forward in a direction that permanently tied him to Jacinda. The anger in her eyes flared into absolute resolve. She made it clear that this news changed everything regarding their children, warning Michael that she would take whatever legal steps were necessary to ensure Wiley and Amelia were shielded from the ongoing turbulence of the Corinthos family dynamics. As Willow stormed away down the corridor, the reality of the long road ahead settled over the group. Jacinda looked at Michael, acknowledging the immense storm her return had sparked, but Michael took her hand, making a quiet commitment that they would face the legal battles, the family scrutiny, and the uncertain future of Port Charles together. For more context on the story, see this video discussing Jacinda's pregnancy revelation on General Hospital, which covers the fan reactions and dramatic developments surrounding Michael and Carly.